Weebs!
Go ahead and get started. Okay, there we go. This is a Ravener model, and it's one of my unpainted models from my first army, which was Tyranids. They were what kind of got me into all the modeling and everything, and I haven't really painted one in a while, but I'm gonna do this guy up in the same color scheme as the rest of my army, which is kind of a variation of the Hive Fleet Hydra. Let's get started. So he's got a base coat down already, which is a primer base coat. This is made by Army Painter, and unfortunately it's been a long time since I painted him or sprayed him down, but it is the alien purple Army Painter base coat or primer spray, whatever they call it. So he was sprayed down with that, and mostly so I don't have to really worry too much about the main parts of his color. So instead, we're going to paint the stuff that is not that alien purple color, and I'm going to start out with deep blue. Army Painter Deep Blue is going to make up really the like the exoskeleton, these kind of little bony bits that I've got going through here. Then I'm going to do black for his armor plating, finish off his bone claws with skeleton bone. Just getting a little water on my brush so I can thin this down a tiny bit. So with those paints, really, roughly the consistency that I try to go for is probably about 2 or 3 drops of paint per drop of water on a wet palette. I find that sometimes can be a bit thin if you don't mind going over your model like 2 or 3 times to get the color down a little bit fuller. But that's kind of what I usually aim for. When I first put this model together, I wasn't really paying a huge amount of attention to mold lines and the seams showing between pieces joining. So there's a couple of spots that aren't really going to come out too perfect with this, but at the same time, it's always better to go over with thin paint rather than just slap a whole bunch on hoping you can cover it up. So I'm trying to avoid getting any of the blue over the fleshy skin pieces, because those I do want to keep purple. It doesn't matter too much if I get a little line over them, but for this armor plating, I can be really rough around there if I want to speed it up a little bit, because the armor is going to get painted over with a matte black paint. If you kind of need to be a little bit messy, it's an okay place to do it. What I also like to do, I don't know if you can see it very well, but sort of in this armor plating, there's this little kind of chitinous bit where it kind of looks like the armor plating is like joining to the exoskeleton. And that part I also kind of like to hit up in blue as well. So what I'm doing when I start painting the armor, I'm going to start with a matte black paint on it, but then I'm going to do some dry brushing with some blues around the edges to give it sort of like a dark blue look. And I like the little chitinous bits in there to kind of look like they're the part that's kind of joining the armor plating to the exoskeleton a bit by keeping them blue and keeping that transition going. Again, you don't gotta be too precise here. If you kind of bleed some of the paint over onto like the fleshy bits again, it's not the end of the world. Tyranids are very organic models, which makes them kind of in a lot of ways a lot easier to paint. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily detract from the look of the model if there are a few little differently colored areas where some of the purple is maybe a little bit darker than some of the other parts. You can still make it work. What I love about painting this color scheme is it does come out looking kind of sinister, like a serious alien threat during the painting process. It's very cartoony because you have a lot of bright blues and purples until you shade it, darken it down a little more. Again, with this one, I'm not really striving for like perfect layers. I do want to get it really close, but there's a little bit that's not perfectly blue yet. Doesn't matter too much, because we're going to come in here with some really dark washes and kind of darken that out again. So while we wait for that to dry, I think I'm going to go around and do these little exposed muscle ridges. So with those, I'm going to try out some Warcolors Pink 5. gonna gently fill those little exposed muscle bits in. Probably not gonna get all of them because of the way this model is glued together. I'm still gonna try to get what I can. And with with these, well, of course, you want to try to keep the paint in those little separations, those little bits of the exposed muscle. If you kind of bleed over a tiny bit, it's not going to be a big deal because we're going to come back over and kind of dry brush this with some pink a little bit later on, and those edges are going to get highlighted. So some of that bleed over usually gets kind of washed out by that process. These were this was the first paint scheme I went for with an army, so it was very important to me that I could do it sloppy and not really have to worry too much about affecting the overall quality. Pick a nice paint scheme that works well on models that can kind of mask some sloppiness. It's a lot easier to get started. All the Space Marines and nice smooth armored models really look gorgeous, but it's sometimes a challenge to get your paint going really smooth and even on. So these fully organic Tyranid models are a pretty good way to learn. So with the exoskeleton, since the exoskeleton is a blue color and the armor plating is black, I'm trying to find a way to kind of marry those two colors together. So we're going with Army Painter's Dark Tone. This is a really quite black wash. As you can see it pouring out there. It's basically ink. We kind of want to go through and be pretty liberal in the recesses. This stuff will take a while to dry with how heavy we're going to gloop it in here, but then once it's dry, essentially the inside of the exoskeleton will look really dark and black, which is a much more monstrous alien look than just having a nice shiny blue skeleton. Again, we're trying to avoid touching the skin with this as much as possible, but if you get it on the armor plating, that's not the end of the world, because that armor plating needs to be black anyway. For that, we're going to use Army Painter Matte Black. You can tell I use this bottle quite a lot. Oh no! Always happens. I was going to use this dry brush later, but I can use it now to gloop some paint up, why not? Well, at least we saved most of it, and the rest of it we're likely going to end up using anyway. So let's get started with the matte black. I'm going to mix in a little bit of water because we don't want this to be some thick gloopy paint, so thin it down just a little bit. And for the black, we do really want to get the black very evenly on. So if it's showing a little bit thin under, this is one of those paints you will want to be patient with and do 2 or more layers of. For this, we're just kind of hitting the armor plating. So anything that looks kind of like one of these little armor plates, we're going to paint black. Doesn't mean we're painting like bones and claws and stuff that color as well, which I think is more traditional for High Fleet Hydra. Those we are going to do as an actual bone color, just because I feel it makes the models pop a little bit better to have a brighter color contrasting all these dark blues, purples, and blacks. Some of these Tyranid models, usually the bigger ones and the character models, in this armor plating, they'll also have these little rips like the exposed bits of muscle here. So if you come across those, I always do like to do those the same color as the exposed muscle. One of the nice bits about painting Tyranids is that, you know, once you pick your colors out, pretty much every model in the army is consisting of the same bits, just in different variations. And you really only need to pick a couple base colors and your shades and your highlights, of course. And that's kind of all you need for the army. You can paint like the whole army using just a pretty small selection of paints. It lends itself really well to batch painting. Usually I would paint probably maybe 6, you know, Gene Stealers, Termagants, Hormagaunts at a time, or like 3 Raveners at a time, 3 Neurothropes, or 3 Zoanthropes at a time. But it's a really nice army for getting something painted quickly. It doesn't take a lot of different paints. It doesn't take necessarily even a lot of complex skills to paint them. You can get something on the table that looks pretty decent pretty quick. Going to try to be a little bit neat here around this transition from the armor plating into the head, because I don't want to back and forth paint over that too much. But it looks like I got most of my armor plating done now. I'm just going to go in here and do the underside of the head armor. Second coat of black. Remember, we're going for a really even consistency here, or smooth consistency of black. This part we don't want to be patchy or streaky. Speaking of demons, I'm going to go for some demonic yellow now. Is going to make the eyes for my Tyranids. So with the Tyranids, I just do regular glowy eyes. I'm not really aiming to, you know, paint irises and stuff on them. I don't really enjoy painting eyes super much. So with these guys, they just have glowing eyes. So we're just doing yellow, and I'm doing the eyes now because I'm about to go back over the purple. And I've just done the black, so if I make any mistakes, like, now's the time to correct it. If I make any mistakes. Psh, it's me painting eyes, of course I'm gonna make mistakes. Yeah, hashtag hate painting eyes. Actually, you know what, before I do the purple, I think I'm gonna go ahead and do the bone pieces on this guy. So we're going to use some skeleton bone from Army Painter and start painting all those little claws and bony protrusions and spiky bits. start with the very bottom of the model with the tail. Since you're doing a very light color on top of a fairly dark color, this bone is also going to take at least 2 coats. Usually I wait till it's dry. If it's dry by eye, then I'm pretty confident that it's okay, that it's ready to take another layer. If it still looks a little like slick or glossy, then what's going to happen is some of your paint is already kind of on there, dry, and some of it isn't. And if you start trying to move your brush around, put in new wet paint on top of that transition between the dry paint and the still wet paint, you're just going to kind of scratch it around and stretch it out, and you'll leave very noticeable paint tears if you didn't let the paint dry quite long enough. So you can start to see as the bone becomes more pronounced, what I was talking about before about that kind of additional brightness in the model. This model does get kind of grimdark as you finish painting it, and the bone is a nice contrast color. It's a dark, monotonous, boring monster with shiny claws. So I'm not sure if you noticed, but there's some areas on this where the texture seems a little sandy, and it's kind of the consequence of primer that I used for it. So spray primers can be really helpful in priming a lot of models fast, particularly in a color that you're maybe already painting your army in. In this case, that alien purple spray primer really helped me get the base colors down really fast, so I don't need to first prime it and then paint that color on after. The downsides are if you know the temperature and the humidity isn't perfect, it doesn't always spray on with the best consistency. And in this case, I can't recall what the weather was like when I painted these, but you see some areas it's gone on just a little bit sandy, and that's going to become a bit more obvious when we start dry brushing. Thankfully, most of that sandy effect is on his claws here, and when we dry brush a little bit of white onto the claws, it's just going to make them look, I think, better than anything. At the same time, you know, if you get that over all of your models, it can be very challenging to deal with. Unfortunately, I don't really have many answers for that, but if you find that you're getting really sandy priming, maybe consider switching to a different priming style, at least for your more detailed models. Like airbrush isn't feasible for everybody, but even just hand brushing on a primer, thin it down a little bit might help in those cases. But I think once it's happened to the model, unfortunately, it's probably usually a bit too late, but I'm open to being corrected if that's not the case. So I think with Tyranids, their claws are supposed to be strong enough that they can puncture Space Marine plating or plate armor without too much difficulty. I forget what the AP is on these guys, but it's supposed to be pretty scary if you're a Space Marine. What I like about these guys, I haven't really played the Raveners very much, but because they're kind of situational, but a small unit of them can pack really quite a lot of damage. Not as much as Gene Stealers, especially not properly supported Gene Stealers, but they're kind of like a mini Gene Stealer threat that can natively deep strike. So these guys burrow up out of the ground at you. Alright, we painted our bone, so now that means we get to go paint all the bone again. Oh, the mini holder thing. So that is a Citadel. It's really super handy. It's I can't remember how much it was, but it was like $20 or $30. It makes holding your models a lot easier because you don't need to hold the model now. You can just hold the thing holding the model. I only just got this paint handle recently, but it's also been a really good piece of gear. You definitely don't need one, and most models I've painted without one, but it does make it a lot easier to balance your hand against the base of the model without having to touch the model. This is bony bits done. And then, what else? I gotta tidy up his purple a bit now. Get that purple neat. Alright, so with our alien purple, we're just kind of coming back in and we're trying to touch over those spots that we bled over into before. And since we are thinning this down because we don't want a big gloopy mess, some of these particularly bright spots of bone or particularly dark spots of black, we might need to go over, twice just to get them a bit smooth. But this is what I was saying earlier. This is a model type that lends itself really well to like speed painting. If you do have like a little patch of purple that looks slightly darker, it doesn't necessarily take away from the aesthetic of the model. Sometimes it actually improves the aesthetic by making it look like it's got splotchy kind of normal looking skin. But if you're really concerned about it, like, you can definitely spend a lot of extra time tidying up. And while I like my models to look good up close, at the same time, most of the time your models are going to be seen from several feet away. So while you can go crazy about detail, just remember that it doesn't need to look good right up next to your face so much as it needs to look good 4 or 5 feet away from you. And that's why you can kind of exaggerate with highlights pretty well on these, because that detail then can be seen from further away. I think we got all our base colors down. We already shaded our exoskeleton while that was all drying. So I think now we can hopefully take some of the cartoony feel away and start giving it some really deep shading. So what I'm going to do here is go over with a couple of different washes. What I'm going to I'm going to use a nice purple tone from Army Painter on the skin, and then I'm going to use a soft tone on the bone, and then just to give the model a little bit more of a blue hint on the black that I've done down here, I'm also going to use a little bit of blue tone on the black armor plating, and it doesn't really do much, but at certain angles the glossiness of the tone kind of catches the light, and it's nice if you're giving a slightly bluish reflection back with it. So we're starting with purple tone from Army Painter. And then with this stuff, I really just like to get sort of messy with it and get it all over the purple. So I know we've already got our color down and we're not necessarily trying to repeat that, but at the same time, the way this kind of dries out lends to a more organic look than just having a purple, smooth, seamless purple color would. And then, so with the skin, those little exposed muscle bits that we colored in earlier with that Warcolors pink, those parts we're also going to wash with the purple as well. Honestly, more important than even highlighting is getting a wash right on Tyranid models. They've got so many recessed details that can just look super cool. So here's, well, remember where I did those eyes earlier and I got a little bit extra in of yellow over it, so I tidied up the edges a bit, and now I'm just trying to get wash into the eye areas, but not like on the eye itself. So then I'm going to go with blue tone over the black armor, and again, the blue doesn't really need to be super thick. It's not going to be a very super obvious shade in here either. Most of the reason why we're using a blue wash on the black is to give it like a slightly bluish sheen from different angles, so that it doesn't look like it's a pure black bit of armor on there. And then last, for washes, I'm going to go over it with that soft tone we talked about earlier. And this is probably why I think particular paint job it lends itself super well to batch painting, because you do need a fair bit of time for these last layers of wash to dry. I just put down a purple tone, all the flesh blue tone on all the armor plating, and now I'm doing a soft tone on all the bone pieces. There's just a lot of the model that's really wet, and you don't want to try to go over and start highlighting a still wet model. Usually I would do these as multiples, that way while I'm waiting for my first ones to finish dry, I can start working on the next ones already. What I'm going to do is start dry brushing the exoskeleton bits in there. So again, we do want to keep them fairly blue. We're going again with blue and black on the armor and the exoskeleton, but I'm shaking this up a little bit from the planned highlights, the armor plating. I'm going to do crystal blue to kind of dry brush a highlight on the exoskeleton, do void shield blue to dry brush highlights on the armor plating. The exoskeleton, while being a brighter color, being blue, gets a darker highlight. The armor plating, being a darker color, is actually going to get a brighter highlight. And then for this, we're just doing some dry brushing. So I got some of the void shield that I'm going to use on the black, and this black is dry. I'll just go ahead and go with this. You can see some of that blue is getting left down on the raised parts of what used to be this black armor plate. So now we're kind of reproducing some of that coloring we're getting on the exoskeleton here. All this bone is kind of in areas that are out of the way, so I'm confident that I can use a big brush to dry brush this part. So for this, I'm going to use Mummy Robe to highlight the bone pieces. So again, we're kind of taking it at a bit of an angle, and we're taking it at an angle to the straight edges as much as possible, and to anywhere where there's something kind of raised up, so that we can try to grab more distinction between the raised parts of this bone and the stuff underneath. So we are going pretty heavily over the skeleton bone that we painted and washed. So we want to do it kind of sparingly, not go super hard on it, and typically only try to come at it from the top down when dry brushing. That way we're simulating light falling and we're not accidentally brightening up the underside of the model too much. He's gonna get some Warlock Purple for his highlights. Warlock Purple is a bit of a pinkish color, despite it saying purple, and we're using that to kind of raise up the edges of this guy's muscle and all that cool extra detail on the purple stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do, but I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, the only person you really gotta work to impress is yourself. You just gotta have a model that you want to look at and think, wow, that's so cool. I can't believe I made that. I think the idea of this style of chitin that I'm doing here is like I always thought to myself that it's like a really, really sort of super dark blue that it gets so black when it's so compressed like this. Then right at all these edges where it frays or wears and tears and gets little like scratches or bits chipped off or flaked off. I like to think that that kind of reveals that inner blue material that it's made out of. Try to make sure when you're doing this, you're kind of always brushing towards the edge. That way, if you kind of miss a brush stroke or two, it looks sort of jagged. It helps fit the effect that we're going for here, rather than, you know, perfect smooth straight lines all the time. And since it's a really thin down black and it's really translucent, you don't run too much risk of going over the blue highlighting that we've done. And even if you do, it's still partly see-through, so it helps the effect that we're going for. Yeah, and that's basically it. That's a really simple Tyranid Ravener. Yeah. Alright, later guys.
We're just trying to enjoying the hobby rather than everything having to be perfect or you know, professional level. We're just trying to show people that this is a fun thing. It's not, you know, so serious.
Practice gets you shut down better.
What is wrong with this guy?